The crazy mountains of Montana have a way of looking at you that makes you feel like an intruder in your own skin. It is a range that rises out of the plains like a jagged set of broken teeth, indifferent and ancient, holding on to secrets that the local tribes warned us about centuries ago. Most people look at those peaks and see beauty, but I see a graveyard without headstones. I have spent far too many nights staring at topographical maps until the contour lines start to look like the ridges of a thumbprint, a giant hand that just reached down and plucked someone off the face of the earth. You start to notice the patterns after a while, and those patterns are what keep me awake when the rest of the world is dreaming of safety. This is not just about a man getting lost in the woods, because men who get lost usually leave a trail that makes sense. This is about Aaron Hedges and a series of events that defies every rule of logic we have tried to impose on the wilderness. It was September of 2014, and the air in the high country was already beginning to carry that sharp metallic tang of coming snow. Aaron was 38 years old, a man who lived for the hunt, a man who understood the weight of a pack and the necessity of a sharp knife. He was not a novice playing at being an outdoorsman. He was with two friends trekking into the northern end of the Crazies, heading toward a spot near Sunlight Lake. The plan was simple and routine for hunters of their caliber. On the morning of September 7th, Aaron decided to strike out on his own to find a cache of supplies they had dropped off earlier. He had his bow, his pack, and years of experience tucked into his boots. He told his friends he would meet them at the camp later. He stepped into the tree line, and the forest simply swallowed him whole. No one heard a shout. No one saw a branch snap. He just moved from the world of the living into the world of the missing in the span of a few heartbeats. When he did not show up at the camp that night, the clock started ticking with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. His friends did what they could, but by the next day the authorities were moving in. Gallatin County Search and Rescue is not a group of amateurs. These are people who know how to read the dirt like a book. They brought in the dogs, the helicopters with thermal imaging, and dozens of ground searchers who combed the area with the intensity of a forensic team. They were looking for a man who should have been easy to find. He was wearing camouflage, yes, but he was also carrying gear that should have left a signature. The weather turned sour almost immediately, dumping a thick, suffocating blanket of snow over the peaks. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to hide something, pulling a white sheet over a crime scene before the investigators could get a good look at the evidence. The search went on for days and then weeks with absolutely nothing to show for it. No broken twigs, no candy wrappers, no footprints in the mud that predated the snow. It was as if Aaron Hedges had simply evaporated. Then the first piece of the puzzle was found, and it was the kind of discovery that makes your blood turn into slush. His boots were found. Not together, but scattered. They were miles away from where he was last seen, located in an area that made no tactical or survival sense. Think about that for a moment. You are in the Montana wilderness in September. A storm has moved in. The temperature is dropping toward freezing. Your feet are your only way out of the meat grinder. Why would a seasoned hunter take off his boots? You do not just lose a pair of lace-up hunting boots by accident. You have to sit down, unlace them, and pull them off. The boots were sitting in the dirt, weathered but intact. When the searchers found them, they expected to find a body nearby. A man without boots in that terrain is a man who is not going to last more than a few hours. But there was no Aaron. There were no clothes. Just the empty vessels that used to carry him. It gets stranger. Much stranger. As the investigation pushed further, they found his backpack. It was miles away from the boots, perched in a high, rocky area that would have been an agonizing climb for someone in peak physical condition, let alone someone who was presumably suffering from the early stages of hypothermia or injury. Inside the pack were his electronics, his gear, and his water. Everything a man needs to stay alive was left behind like a discarded thought. It was as if he was shedding his identity piece by piece as he climbed higher into the maw of the peaks. I have seen this before in cases that defy explanation. It is often called paradoxical undressing when it relates to hypothermia, but that usually happens right at the end in the final moments of life. Aaron's gear was being found over a massive geographic area. The distances involved were staggering. To get from point A to point B, he would have had to traverse ridges and valleys that would challenge a mountain goat. And he would have had to do it while the mountains were being hammered by a blizzard. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the woods right before something goes wrong. It is a heavy, pressurized silence that feels like it is pushing against your eardrums. I suspect Aaron was hearing that silence long before he started dropping his equipment. A year passed. Then 2. The case went cold, buried under the weight of other disappearances and the inevitable passage of time. Then, in 2016, a rancher on the other side of the mountain range made a discovery that reset the entire narrative. He found a cache of Aaron's items on his private property miles and miles away from the initial search area. We are talking about a distance that would require a superhuman effort to cover on foot, especially given the terrain. Among the items was a GoPro camera. People hoped that the footage would provide a roadmap of his final hours. They hoped for a video diary or a glimpse of a pursuer. But the camera was empty of answers. It contained nothing that could explain how Aaron ended up on the complete opposite side of the mountain from where he vanished. Eventually they found what was left of him. His remains were discovered in a spot that had been searched multiple times during the initial push. This is a recurring theme in these disappearable cases. A body appears in a location that was previously cleared by professionals. It is as if the mountain held onto him and then decided to spit him back out once the curiosity had died down. His remains were scattered, which the authorities attributed to animal scavenging. But the placement of his bones felt off. They were found near a small creek tucked away in a manner that felt almost deliberate. There was no clothing found with the remains. No remnants of the heavy hunting jacket or the rugged trousers he had been wearing. He was just gone, reduced to bone and memory in a place he never should have been. When you look at the map of Aaron's movements, it does not look like the path of a lost man. A lost man wanders in circles or follows a drainage down to find a road. Aaron's path looked like someone was being chased or someone was being led. He went up when he should have gone down. He shed his most vital gear when he should have been clinging to it for dear life. There are things in those mountains that do not show up on infrared cameras. There are pockets of reality where the compass needle spins and the mind begins to fracture. I have talked to hunters who speak of a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread that hits them out of nowhere, a feeling of being watched by something that does not have eyes. They call it the Oz factor. The birds stop singing. The wind dies. The world becomes a vacuum. I believe Aaron Hedges stepped into one of those vacuums. The official cause of death was listed as undetermined, which is the polite way of saying the experts are baffled. They will point to the weather and the terrain and the fragility of the human body, but they cannot explain the boots. They cannot explain the backpack found on a ridge that required a professional climb. They cannot explain how a man in the throes of death could travel dozens of miles across a mountain range in a blizzard without being spotted by a single helicopter or thermal sensor. It is as if he moved through a different version of the forest, one where the laws of physics and distance do not apply. I have seen the photos of the area. It is beautiful in a way that feels predatory. The shadows under the pines are too dark even in the middle of the day. The more I look into the case of Aaron Hedges, the more I feel that weary weight in my chest. We like to think we are the masters of our environment because we have satellite phones and Gore-Tex jackets. But Aaron had those things too. He had the best gear money could buy and the kind of survival skills that only come from a lifetime in the dirt. None of it mattered. The moment he stepped away from his friends, he was already a ghost. The mountains did not just take his life. They took his story and twisted it into something unrecognizable. They turned a routine hunting trip into a gothic horror story that has no ending. Every time I see a pair of boots left in the woods, I feel a shiver that has nothing to do with the temperature. There is a theory that some people are more susceptible to these anomalies than others. Maybe it is something in the blood, or maybe it is just bad luck like being struck by lightning on a clear day. But once the mountain marks you, there is no coming back. Aaron was a strong, capable man who was erased by an invisible hand. We find the pieces of these people years later and we try to reconstruct their final moments, but the math never adds up. The distance divided by time equals impossibility. The lack of tracks equals something that does not touch the ground. We are left with the bones and the silence, and the nagging feeling that if we look too closely into the trees, we might see what Aaron saw before he decided to take off his boots and walk into the dark. The case of Aaron Hedges is not an isolated incident. It is a chapter in a much larger, much darker book that is being written in our national parks and wilderness areas every year. Take the case of Jaryd Atadero, the 3-year-old boy who vanished in the Comanche Peaks wilderness in 1999. His remains were found years later on a high, nearly inaccessible ledge thousands of feet above where he disappeared. Like Aaron, his clothing was found in a condition that baffled investigators, with his little fleece jacket found inside out but otherwise intact. Then there is the disappearance of Filippidis, who went missing from a ski resort in New York and turned up 6 days later in California, dazed and confused, with no memory of how he traveled 3,000 miles. These cases all share that same sickening DNA. The impossible travel, the missing clothing, and the feeling that the victims were moved by something that operates outside our understanding of space and time. We keep searching for answers, but the mountains are not talking. They are just waiting for the next person to step off the trail. The air in the crazy mountains does not just sit around you. It presses. It has a weight to it, a cold clinical indifference that makes your lungs feel like they are filling with wet silt. People talk about the majesty of Montana, the big sky, the rugged beauty that calls to the soul. But I have spent too many nights looking at maps of places where that beauty turned into a trap. I have stared at the topographic lines until they looked like the ridges of a thumbprint. A giant hand that reached down and simply plucked a man from the surface of the earth. Aaron Hedges was not a novice. He was not some weekend warrior who bought a brand new pair of boots and a shiny compass and expected the wilderness to play nice. He was 52 years old, a man whose skin had been cured by the sun and the wind until it was as tough as the elk hide he hunted. He knew those mountains. He knew the way the weather could turn from a mild autumn afternoon into a screaming whiteout in the span of a heartbeat. And yet, on that day in September 2014, the mountains decided that his knowledge was irrelevant. The gear we carry is a lie we tell ourselves to feel safe. We think that a $500 jacket and a GPS unit create a barrier between us and the primordial dark. Aaron had all of it. He was prepared for a week of rugged hunting with his friends. They were looking for elk moving through the high country near Sunlight Peak, a place where the granite teeth of the range bite into the clouds. When Aaron told his friends he was going to break off and head toward a supply cache, it should have been a routine maneuver. A simple walk from point A to point B. But in these cases, point B ceases to exist. The moment he stepped out of sight of his companions, the world around him began to warp. We look at the map and see a straight line. But for Aaron, that line might have become a circle or a spiral leading down into a place where the sun does not reach. The search that followed was one of the most intensive in the history of the region. They had everything. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras that could spot a field mouse in a thicket. Search dogs with noses so sensitive they can pick up a scent molecule from 3 days prior. Hundreds of volunteers crawling over the scree and through the dense stands of timber. They found nothing. For days the mountains were silent. It was as if Aaron had stepped off the edge of the planet. The thermal cameras saw only the cold earth and the occasional deer. The dogs lost the scent almost immediately, pacing in frustrated circles near the point where he was last seen. There is a specific kind of dread that settles over a search party when the technology fails. It is the realization that we are looking for someone using tools that belong to a world he is no longer a part of. Then the first piece of the puzzle appeared, and it was the kind of piece that does not fit into any known picture. They found his boots. They were miles away from where he should have been, sitting in the middle of a snowy field. Think about that for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine the biting cold of a Montana winter. Imagine the frost creeping up your legs and the wind whipping through the pines like a serrated blade. Now imagine reaching down, unlacing your boots, and stepping out of them into the snow. It is an act of madness, or an act of desperation that we cannot comprehend. Some experts talk about paradoxical undressing, a final stage of hypothermia where the brain misinterprets the freezing cold as a burning heat. But that does not explain the distance. It does not explain how a man travels miles through jagged, unforgiving terrain in his stocking feet without leaving a trail of blood or shredded wool. The boots were not alone. Later, they found his water bottle and his backpack. These items were not scattered by animals. They were placed. There is a clinical, almost ritualistic quality to the way items are recovered in these disappearances. It is as if something is unpacking a suitcase, laying out the contents to see what this human was carrying. I have seen it in dozens of files. A pile of clothes neatly folded. A pair of shoes placed side by side on a boulder that no human could climb. In the case of Aaron Hedges, his gear was found in a place that made no sense. He was heading south, but his belongings were found miles to the north over a ridgeline that would have required a grueling uphill climb in the dark. The math of his movement is impossible. If you take the time he went missing and the location where his items were found, he would have had to move with the speed of a professional athlete across terrain that would slow a mountain goat to a crawl. When you spend enough time in the woods, you start to notice the things that are not there. The silence in the crazy mountains during the search was described as heavy. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but a vacuum. No birds. No squirrels. No rustle of wind in the needles. Just a thick, suffocating stillness. It is a sensory warning that something is wrong. Some investigators call it the Oz effect. It is the feeling that you have stepped behind a curtain, into a place where the physics of our world are stretched thin. I believe Aaron Hedges stepped into one of these pockets. I believe the mountain opened up a throat and swallowed him whole, and then years later it spat back the pieces it could not digest. It took nearly a year for his remains to be found. They were not in the search area. They were not even close. A rancher found him on the opposite side of the mountain range, miles away from the boots, miles away from the cache, miles away from sanity. To get to that spot, Aaron would have had to cross a high-altitude pass that was choked with snow and ice. He would have had to do it without his boots. He would have had to do it in the middle of a storm that grounded helicopters. It is a feat of endurance that defies every law of human biology. When the remains were finally analyzed, they offered no answers. Just bones. Just the cold, hard fact of his death. The cause of death was listed as undetermined. Of course it was. How do you write a coroner report for a man who was moved like a chess piece across a map by an invisible hand? The microscopic details are what haunt me at night. The way the rust on his rifle was uniform, as if it had been submerged in something corrosive rather than just left in the rain. The way his clothing was shredded in a pattern that did not match the claws of a bear or the teeth of a mountain lion. It looked more like the fabric had simply given up, the fibers pulled apart by a force that acted on every thread simultaneously. We are looking at a predatory phenomenon that does not leave tracks because it does not touch the ground. We are looking at something that operates in the spaces between the trees, in the shadows that stay dark even when the sun is at its zenith. Aaron was a strong man, a capable man, and he was reduced to a collection of anomalies in a dusty file folder. This is not a story about a man getting lost. This is a story about the boundaries of our reality being porous. We like to think of the wilderness as a place we visit, but for some, it is a place that visits them. It reaches out and marks you. I think about the smell of the air before something goes wrong. People who have survived near misses often talk about a scent like ozone or the smell of scorched metal. They talk about a sudden shift in the light, as if the sun had been swapped for a pale imitation. Aaron did not get a chance to tell us what he smelled or what he saw. He only left us his boots, a silent testament to a moment of total shattering realization that he was no longer at the top of the food chain. The pattern is the only thing we have to hold on to, and it is a terrifying anchor. These cases are mirrors of one another, separated by geography but linked by a common twisted thread. Take the case of young Jaryd Atadero. In October 1999, this 3-year-old boy was hiking with a group in the Comanche Peaks wilderness of Colorado. He ran ahead of the adults for just a moment. A few seconds. That is all it takes for the mountain to blink and make you disappear. Despite a massive search, nothing was found for 4 years. Then 2 hikers found his remains on a ledge 550 feet above the trail. It was a climb that an elite rock climber would find challenging, let alone a 3-year-old boy in a fleece jacket. When they found Jaryd's clothing, the strangeness only deepened. His little fleece jacket was found inside out. His shoes were found, but his socks were missing. There was no blood. No signs of a struggle. Just the clothing sitting on a high, lonely ledge, as if it had been dropped from the sky. The investigators were baffled. How does a child climb a vertical face of rock? How does his jacket end up inside out without being torn to ribbons by the brush? It is the same sickening DNA we see in the Aaron Hedges case. The impossible travel. The missing or displaced clothing. The feeling that the victim was not a person but a specimen being examined and then discarded in a place where it would be difficult to find. Then there is the bizarre account of Danny Filippidis. In February 2018, Danny was on a ski trip with his friends at Whiteface Mountain in New York. He told his friends he was going to get his phone from the car. He never came back. A massive search of the ski resort turned up nothing. 6 days later, Danny turned up in Sacramento, California. He was wearing the same ski gear. He was still wearing his helmet and goggles. He had no idea how he had traveled nearly 3,000 miles across the country. He had gaps in his memory that felt like physical holes in his brain. He had a haircut that he did not remember getting. He had a brand new cell phone that he did not recognize. Danny survived, but he was a shell of a man for a long time. He represents the other side of this coin. While Aaron Hedges and Jaryd Atadero were left as bones on a mountainside, Danny was transported. He was moved across the continent in a way that defies explanation. Did he walk? Did he hitchhike? No one saw him. No cameras caught him. It is as if he was plucked from a snowy mountain in New York and deposited on a sunny street in California by a force that views our geography as a playground. These are not accidents. These are not the results of simple human error. They are the fingerprints of something that operates outside our understanding of space and time. We try to find comfort in the labels. We call it foul play. We call it animal attacks. We call it exposure. But those labels are just bandages on a gaping wound of the unknown. When you look at the Aaron Hedges file, you see the cracks in the world. You see a man who was equipped for everything the earth could throw at him, but he was not equipped for what happens when the earth stops being the earth. You see the boots in the snow and you realize that at some point Aaron knew the game was over. He knew that the things he carried were useless. He stepped out of his boots because he was no longer walking on the ground we know. The crazy mountains are still there. They are tall and beautiful and cold. They do not care that we are talking about them. They do not care about the grief of a family or the confusion of an investigator. They are just waiting. Somewhere in those peaks there is a spot where the wind sounds like a human voice and the shadows move against the sun. There is a spot where the logic of the world fails, and the hunters become the hunted. Aaron Hedges found that spot. He walked into it, and he never truly came back. We found his bones, but his story is still out there drifting in the high country, waiting for the next person to step off the trail and into the dark. Every time I go into the woods now, I look at my feet. I feel the weight of my boots, and I wonder what it would take to make me leave them behind. I wonder if the silence I hear is just the absence of noise, or if it is the presence of something else. Something that is watching and waiting for the right moment to reach out. The math never adds up. The distance is too far. The time is too short. The truth is too heavy to carry. We are left with the bones and the silence, and the nagging feeling that the mountains are not just rocks and trees. They are a living, breathing entity that occasionally gets hungry. And when it does, no amount of Gore-Tex or experience can save you. The case of Aaron Hedges remains a jagged scar on the history of Montana. It is a reminder that we are guests in a house that does not want us there. We find the pieces of these people years later and we try to reconstruct their final moments, but the pieces are from different puzzles. The jacket is inside out. The boots are miles away. The body is on a ledge it could never reach. We are looking for answers in a language we do not speak. Until we admit that there are things in the wilderness that defy our science and our logic, we will keep losing people to the gray spaces. We will keep finding empty boots in the snow. The search for Aaron Hedges ended, but the investigation into what happened to him will never truly be over. It lives in the back of the mind of every person who has looked at the photos of his discarded gear. It lives in the shiver that runs down your spine when the sun goes down and you are still a mile from the trailhead. It is a chapter in a book that has no ending, a book written in bone and shadow. We are the ones left behind to read the pages, trying to make sense of a narrative that was written by a malevolent ghost. The mountains are not talking. They are just waiting. They are waiting for the next hunter, the next hiker, the next child who thinks they are safe because they can see the trail. They are waiting for the moment you blink. And in that moment the world you know will vanish, replaced by a cold, dark reality where your boots are no longer necessary. We will find your gear. We will find your remains. But we will never find you. You are gone into the static. You are part of the pattern now. And the pattern is hungry. As I close this file, I think about that ranch where Aaron was found. I think about the grass growing through his ribs, and the way the wind whistles through the empty sockets of a skull that once held the memories of a life well lived. I think about the impossibility of his journey and the sheer terrifying scale of the mystery. We are not the masters of our environment. We are just lucky until our luck runs out. And when it does, the mountains will be there to collect the debt. Good night, to those of you still listening. Stay on the trail. Keep your boots laced tight. And if you feel the air get heavy, if you smell the ozone and see the shadows stretching toward you in the middle of the day, do not stop to look. Just run. Because once the mountain marks you, there is no coming back. The case of Aaron Hedges is closed, but the mountains are still open, and they are always looking for new stories to tell.